Hey everyone, last week we rebuilt and repainted this junkyard find Honda ATC 200S suspension fork. Now this week we're going to show you how to swap the fork onto a Honda ATC 90, 110, or 125M frame. But it's not going on that 110, it's destined for Dad's ATC 110 Monster Trail bike conversion. But don't worry, all the stuff we're going to cover in this video will apply to any ATC 90, 110, or 125. So if you got one of those guys and always wanted front suspension, be sure to stick around to the end of the video because we're going to show how it's done from start to finish. Now the first thing we gotta do is remove the two bolts and the nut off the fork bridge so we can get the handlebars out of the way. And now that the handlebar assembly is off, we can disconnect the headlight wiring and remove the headlight mounting bracket from the fork. Now we can carefully remove the steering stem nut. Now try to take it easy during this part so you don't upset the top race and the bearings. You'll also want to keep your hand or something else below the steering stem to catch any bearings that are going to fall out the bottom. Now for the ugly part. The ATC 90 and 110 steering stops aren't compatible with the 185 and 200S forks, so you're going to need to grind or cut the original stop off of the frame. But the problem we have now is we've got no steering stops and the fork smashes into the frame. Let's figure out a no welding way of fixing the problem. Now if I wasn't working on a finished bike, I think I would have just welded up a new steering stop like 180 degrees on the back side of the frame so it would work with the new fork. But since I don't feel like repainting anything, I figured out something that should work for you even if you don't have a welder. The plan is to drill and tap a couple of holes and run some long grade 8 bolts up into the fork. Now if we place the holes right, the bolts should hit the frame just before the fork touches the gas tank. If you don't have a tap, you could always just drill the holes a little bit larger and use a nut to hold the bolt in place too, I guess. I wanted to make things look a little bit prettier, so I ended up throwing a couple layers of marine heat shrink over the bolts just to cover up the threads. Yeah, that's pretty nice, and it should also keep the bolts from scratching up the paint on the frame as well. Now that the fork mods are all done, let's put the bearings back in the lower race and hope we didn't lose any when we took the old fork off. Be sure to take your time when putting the new fork back in the steering tube so you don't upset the top bearings in the race. And then tighten the top nut back up so the whole assembly is tight, but not so tight that you feel a whole lot of drag when you're turning the fork from side to side. The fender off of the new fork was unusable, so we're going to try to see if we can modify the old 110 fender to fit the new fork. The plan is to chop up the junk fender and use it as a jig to drill mounting holes in the 110 fender. Now be sure you measure everything carefully before you start drilling, because I ended up being a little bit off with my holes and I had to ream a couple of them out before I could get the fender to fit up into the fork. But luckily you can't see my mess up after it was all installed. Now the last step on the fender is to pull the grommets out of the old fender and pop them in the new holes. Yeah, that should work out nice. Now let's see how it looks on the bike. Yeah, buddy, the 110 Fender looks right at home on the 200S fork. Now I just got to figure out a way to mount up the headlight. But before we do that, we need to replace the 110's top fork bridge with the one off the 200S, since the 110's is too narrow for the new fork. Yeah, you got it on backwards, dude. You're gonna have to flip it around. It's not gonna work like that. Much better. Now let's get the handlebars back on. We rebuilt the brakes and the hub in last week's video, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you missed out on it and want to see how to rebuild a Honda 185S or 200S fork. I'm going to throw down a bunch of never sees on the axle just to make sure this thing never rusts or seizes back in the hub again. We're getting close, dude. We just need to thread the axle in place and tighten down the clamp. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Sucker looks mean. Now we just got to figure out how to modify the 200S's headlight bracket to fit the 110's headlight. After doing some measurements, it looks like I should be able to take the hardware off of the outside of the 200S's headlight and bolt it to the inside of the 110's headlight. Yeah, that should work out just fine. I just need to do a little trimming and drill some new holes, but this is going to look great. We ended up brassing a couple of nuts onto the bracketry, but that's not totally necessary if you don't have a torch. You can just drill a hole and use a normal nut and bolt. The last step was to chop a little excess material off of our new custom brackets, but after that was done, the thing went together like a champ. Nice, it turned out great. Now let's roll the bike outside for some glamour shots and see how it looks out in the sun. Well, I hope everybody out there had a good time this week. I hope you learned something new, and I really hope this video gave you some great ideas for your next project. And if you gained some value from this video, I'd like to ask if you can return the favor and please click the like button before you take off. Every little like I receive will help YouTube promote my channel, and the more YouTube promotes me, the more cool stuff I can build for you in the future. And I know I've been really teasing the blue bike over the last few weeks, but don't worry, dude. I'm getting really close to having it finished, and I'll have the build videos up really soon. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already, because you're not going to want to miss out on seeing this bad boy come to life. So in the meantime, you can click the video on the left if you want to see the build videos of my other three-wheeler conversion bike, or you can click the video on the right to catch up on last week's video. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.